Hello and welcome to tutorial 94 in the series of tutorials and programs that focus on TradeStation Easy Language. And what I'm going to be demonstrating in this tutorial is how to store vectors within vectors to create a sort of two-dimensional vector. And the simple example we're going to use is drawing lines at the high and the low of the last n bars, and that number being a user input. So what we're going to do is for each bar we're going to store two lines in a vector, and then we're going to store that vector in another vector. So it's sort of a little bit like a two-dimensional array, but vectors have got some advantages such that we don't need to predetermine how large the vector is going to be. So that is something that will be useful in this particular example. So what I've done, I've actually created the program already and I've got it applied to the chart here, and you can see what's happening as new bars are created. We're getting lines drawn in red and the original lines drawn in blue. So what I'm going to do is divide this tutorial into two videos. The first video is going to show the initial creation of the lines, and then the second video is going to be taking the program that we've already created so far and modifying it so that every time a new bar starts, the oldest line is going to, the oldest two lines are going to be moved to the most between the last bar and the most recent bar. For example, you can see here that this line and this line were originally lines from this bar over here. Okay, so let's go straight into the programming, and you can see I've created a program here which is already applied to the chart, but there's really nothing in it at the moment. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to declare some namespaces, and the ones we're going to use are EL system, EL system.collections, and EL system dot drawing, and finally EL system dot drawing objects. And we're going to be using the new drawing objects capabilities rather than the traditional TL underscore new drawing objects. Okay, and the next thing we want to do is create an input, and there's just going to be one input for this program, and that's just going to call it, we're just going to call it numbars. This is going to be the number of bars that we want to draw. I'm going to just set that to be 5 initially, and then we're going to declare our variables. And the first one is we're actually going to have 3 vectors. The first one is going to be bar vector. This is the one that is going to store the vectors containing the line references. We're going to have the line vector. This is going to actually store the line reference objects. And then we're going to have a third one, and this is just going to store various values that we're going to use to draw and calculate the lines. In this particular case, we probably could have done this in a slightly different way, but at least doing it this way, it means that you can expand the program if you wish to draw lines, for example, at a number of different levels. So we're also going to have a couple of trend lines. I'm going to call the first one trend line, just trend line 1. And one of the differences between the new drawing objects and the original TL new type drawing objects is TL new used to return an integer as the line reference. In this particular case, we're getting a object that is returned by these new capabilities. So setting the initial values as null. And then to draw these trend lines, we're going to be using DT points. which I will mention a little bit more later. So dt.1, I'm going to declare that as null. In fact, see, we put a period there, that should be a comma. So dt.1, which is going to be null, and I'm just going to copy that and call it dt.2. Then we're going to just need 3 other variables, and the first one is going to be drawn, and that is going to be a boolean. Let's set that to false, and could declare that as boolean there if we wish to. And we're also going to make this intrabar persist. Just going to verify this to make sure that is okay so far. Okay, and we're going to create 2 others. So what I'm going to do is just copy that and paste twice. And the first one is going to be bar stat last tick. And this is going to be used to store the bar status, and we're going to know if at the end of the bar was the previous tick. That's what we're going to be using this for. I'm going to set this to 0, and actually we need to make that into integer. And then finally we're going to be using a counter called recur counter, and this is going to be used to keep a record of which vector number contains the oldest line, because that is the one that we're going to later on in the second video we're going to be actually moving. So I'm going to set this initially to be numbers minus 1, and we need a semicolon there. And this is also going to be an integer. Okay, so far so good, and probably you may want to add a once clear print log here in case you're going to be using some print statements to help debug. But then we're going to do something when we first apply this to the chart. We're going to say if last bar on chart, then once, I just want to do this once, begin. And this is where we want to draw our initial lines. So we're going to declare these vectors. So bar vector equals new vector, and we're going to do the same for the line vector and the line values vector. So what I'm going to do is just copy this a couple of times just to save a little bit of typing. So this is going to be line vector is new vector, and line values is a new vector. Okay, now what we want to do now is populate line values with the values of the high and the low. So what I'm going to do is we're going to go through all the bars, going back the number of bars. I'm just going to use value 1. So I'm going to say, well, actually, just let me indent that a little bit. I'm going to say for value 1 is equal to 0 to num bars minus 1. Then begin. And the first thing we're going to do is just populate the line values vector with the values. So we're going to go line values dot push back, and if you're not sure what this is going to do, you can right click and we'll get some help. But what we're going to store in here is going to be the high of the bar, which is going to be equal to value 1 plus 1. Bear in mind we're starting with value 1 as 0, so if we want the last bar, then that's going to be value 1 plus 1. And we're going to do Similar thing for the other slot in this vector. Except this time we're going to store the low. So this is going to be low value 1 plus 1. Like so. So that is, in fact, what we also want to do is just to make sure that if this vector has already been created, we've already created the two slots, we don't need to use pushback. So what we're going to do is say if we're going to count the number of values in this vector, if line values dot count is equal to 0, in other words there's nothing in there at the moment, then we're going to do this. It's going to indent these two, highlight them, press tab. But if they already exist, if those spots already exist, we can just slot values into them without creating new lines, as it were, in the vector. So the way we do that, we go line values, and we can access those parts of the vector using the indexes, like for example 0 for high and 1 for low. So I'm going to put value 1 plus 1, like so, and just going to copy this. Similarly, we're going to put in line value 1 we're going to put the low in, like so, and we're going to end that little loop there. Okay, so we've now created some values where we want to draw the lines. What we now need to do is draw the lines and store them in the line vector. So the first thing we're going to do is create a new instance of this line vector. We're going to say new vector, and we're going to draw the lines. We've got another counter. We're going to use value 2, and we're going to say value 2 equals 0 to 1. In this particular case, we're only storing the high and the low. So 0 to 1. If you had more line levels, then you'd need to go 0 to however many line levels you would be going through altogether. So I'm going to begin, and here we need to create a couple of DT points. As I mentioned, we're going to be using the new drawing object capabilities, in which case we're going to actually have a few different options as to how you draw these, whether you use DT points, which is a date time point, or whether you use a bar number point. You can also use XY. In this case, we're going to be using DT point, and the syntax is DT point dot create, and then we need to put in the bar date time, and you can access that by just putting in square brackets however many bars ago you want to go. In this case it's value 1 plus 1. And also the line value, and we know the line value is stored in the line values vector, and the place where it is stored is under value 2, like so. Those are the values that we've just entered a few seconds ago, and we need to tell it what type it is. So we're going to go as type double, like so. Finish that with a semicolon, and we're going to do similar for DT point 2. So I'm just going to copy that and paste it. So DT point 2, except this time we're just going to go bar date time. In other words, the bar date time of the most recent bar, and the rest of it is going to stay the same because we're going to be drawing horizontal lines. Okay, so we've got 2 points. Now we need to creates a trend line using those 2 points. So we're going to go trend line 1 is equal to trend line dot create, and you can see here we're getting some help when we put the period in. Trend line create, and we're just going to put in the 2 line dt point 1 and dt point 2, like so. Incidentally, you could just, for example, copy this dt point dot create, this whole line here up to the bracket, copy that and put that here instead of dt point. It just makes it a little bit more difficult to read, but you could do that. And it's going to change that to a capital T. And then, having created the trend line, what we then need to do is add a couple of attributes of it. So we're going to go trend line 1 dot extend right. I'm going to change that to, make that equal to false. So we don't want it to extend to the right. You may want it to extend to the right, in which case you'd make that true. And let's just, I'm just going to copy this just to save a little bit of typing. Okay, and the other 2 things that we're going to put in here is we're going to put in the persist, trendline 1 dot persist. We want this to be true. In other words, even if this is applied on a tick, then it will remain drawn on the chart. This is a little bit different from the behavior of TL new. TL underscore new, that would have to be drawn on the last tick of the bar, or it would not be remembered. Then, having done all that, we're going to add the trend line to the chart, and we're going to do that by, she didn't need 3, by saying drawing objects dot add, and then in brackets the name of the trend line that we're adding, trend line 1 in this particular case. And we're going to end. And having created, we've drawn the trend lines. We haven't actually added them to the vector yet, so we need to do that. And the way we're going to do that is we're going to go line vector dot pushback, and we're going to put in the reference for the trend line, the object reference, which is trend line 1, which is great. It's adding that to the line vector. And then we need to do one final thing here. We need to add the line vector itself to the bar vector. So we're going to say bar vector dot pushback, and we're going to add to that the line vector. So we've got a vector within a vector, and then we're just going to end that loop. We're going to set drawn to true so that we know that we've drawn the initial lines, and I'm going to say end. So I'm going to just try and verify this now just to see if we've got any errors. It's a lot of typing. Could well be that we do, and we do. So let's just have a look what we're getting. Okay, so I've inadvertently added a then in the for begin end loop. You don't need a then. So again, let's try and verify this. And got one other thing here. It's saying we expect a semicolon. That is because we have forgotten to put in an else. This was when we were populating the line values vector. So let's try again. Okay, and this looks like it's been completed for us. It's supposed to be line vector equals new vector, like so. Okay, let's try that one more time. Clicking F3 or clicking the little green, and looks like we're good. So let's go and have a look at the program. This is already applied to the chart. I've actually got two programs applied to the chart. I'm just going to turn off the original one, and we should see the original lines being drawn there. Okay, so that's the first part of this video. What I'm going to do in the next part is demonstrate how we would go about when a new bar begins to be formed, taking the oldest lines, in other words these two, and drawing them from the penultimate bar on the chart to the new bar of the chart, as well as extending the lines. Okay, so that will be part 2. Thank you very much.